Today, I'd like to give you an in-depth front and rear panel overview of our latest FreeSpace amplifiers. FreeSpace amplifiers are premium commercial amplifiers designed to enhance BOSE FreeSpace loudspeaker installations. Starting with the front panels, each amplifier has a power switch and 3 LEDs. The power LED is solid blue when the amplifier is on and blinks blue when in standby mode. Standby mode can be enabled or disabled on each amplifier, and when enabled, the amplifier will go into a reduced power mode after 20 minutes without an input signal. If in standby mode and an audio signal is detected, the amplifier will automatically wake and amplify audio within 0.7 seconds. The input signal LED is red-green and goes red to indicate the input is clipping above 11 dBu. The output LED is also red-green and goes red to indicate the output is limiting at approximately 80 watts per channel. The IZA 2120LZ and IZA 2120HZ have an 1/8" 3.5mm auxiliary override input. A cable insertion mutes input A and input B for a priority override, but pages can still be made from the page input. The input AB switch selects between rear line input channels A or B. The treble bass controls come next, which are tonal adjustments of both outputs simultaneously on the IZA 2120LZ, but on the IZA 2120HZ, each output has independent treble bass adjustments. Lastly, the master level controls the overall system volume for both the loudspeakers and the auxiliary output when the auxiliary output is set to variable. If the auxiliary output is set to fixed, then the auxiliary output maintains maximum level. When using a remote volume connection, the front panel master level control becomes disabled. Now let's look at the IZA 2120LZ and IZA 2120HZ rear panels. Each amplifier supports 2 line level inputs, A and B, from either unbalanced or balanced sources. Each input has up to 30 dB of attenuation with the gain adjustment knobs. The page input is a mic line input that supports dynamic microphones with voice activation, VOX, or a trigger contact closure for use with push-to-talk microphones, PTT. The page input gain knobs provide 0 to 50 dB of gain control of the page input signal. The page input threshold adjusts the level at which the VOX page input signal causes other inputs to be lowered. A 10 dB adjustment range lifts the page trigger level away from the noise floor to prevent false triggers. At minimum setting, a minus 70 dBu signal will trigger a VOX page. At maximum setting, a minus 60 dBu signal will trigger a VOX page. When in PTT page mode, this adjustment is not active. Next is the mute contact closure connection that upon trigger, a short across the 2 pins, will mute all outputs, including the auxiliary output. There is a bank of dip switches on each amplifier that configure the input, output, remote, auxiliary, auto standby, and page options. The auxiliary output is an unbalanced line level output signal for use with the ZA zone amplifiers or for routing the signal to additional audio equipment. The auxiliary output can be set to either a variable or fixed state relative to the master level. Each output has a trim knob that provides up to 40 dB of attenuation of the individual loudspeaker outputs relative to the master level, and the 2 outputs are inverted 2-pin Euroblock connectors for loudspeaker connections. The outputs are not bridgeable. The power supply supports universal AC voltages from 100 volts AC to 200 volts AC and will ship with one of 5 power cords appropriate for your region. Specific to the IZA 2120LZ rear panel is the single EQ slide switch and single remote. The available EQs are for the FreeSpace DS16, DS40, DS100, and Room Match Utility RMU105 loudspeakers, or a flat setting when loudspeaker EQ isn't required. The remote connection can be used with either a BOSE volume control with AB switch user interface accessory, or with just a BOSE volume control user interface accessory. The IZA 2120LZ has 2 outputs that support mono or stereo operation and can drive low impedance loads with a total available power of 240 watts at 4 ohms. Specific to the IZA 2120HZ rear panel are the dual EQ slide switches and dual remotes. The IZA 2120HZ supports true 2-zone capability. True 2-zone gives the installer the ability to set loudspeaker EQ for each output independently, and each output supports an independent remote volume control with an AB source selection switch. Each output also has their own bass treble adjustments and both the auxiliary input and paging output can be set to either zone 1 only or into both zones 1 and 2. The available EQs are for the FreeSpace DS16, DS40, DS100, and FS3 bass loudspeakers, or a high-pass filter setting when using FS3 systems or when loudspeaker EQ isn't required. The remote connection or connections can be used with either a BOSE volume control with AB switcher user interface accessory or with just a BOSE volume control user interface accessory. The IZA 2120HZ has two mono outputs to drive 70 volt or 100 volt high impedance loads with a total available power of 240 watts. Lastly, let's look at the ZA 2120HZ and ZA 2120LZ rear panels. Each amplifier supports one line level input from either an unbalanced or balanced source. There are a bank of slide switches on each amplifier that configure the input, output, remote, and auto standby options. Next is the mute contact closure connection that upon trigger a short across the two pins will mute both outputs. Each output has a trim knob that provides up to 40 dB of attenuation of the individual loudspeaker outputs relative to the master level. And the two outputs are inverted 2-pin Euroblock connectors for loudspeaker connections. The outputs are not bridgeable. The ZA 2120LZ has two outputs that support mono or stereo operation and can drive low impedance loads with a total available power of 240 watts at 4 ohms. The ZA 2120HZ has two mono outputs to drive 70 volt or 100 volt high impedance loads with a total available power of 240 watts. The power supply supports universal AC voltages from 100 volts AC to 240 volts AC and will ship with one of 5 power cords appropriate for your region. Thank you for watching.